Hello.
Hi, Lauren. Thanks for being.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Oh, you know what? Did I?
I'll try leaving. Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you now.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yay! I'm so glad that the conference sent out a little note. How
Oh, I know. I know. I just saw the email. I know. It's awesome.
I was on the leadership in the age of COVID session,
Yeah.
and it was announced during that session, and I had to go off. I mean, I wasn't on video a lot of it, but I had to
Yeah.
get off because I started bawling. And I just had to I don't even have full makeup on right now because I was like, I don't care. I'm gonna be crying all day. But
Oh, God.
the woman moderating, she kept getting phone calls, and then somebody announced they were like, Biden just won. And she was like, that's why.
She's like, no wonder my phone's been ringing off the hook.
How exciting is this?
I know. It's so exciting.
Hi, Beatriz.
I think she's still connecting.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Hi.
Hi. Oh, let's do this.
I think you're on mute. Maybe we can wait until 1:01 and then let's start, just in case someone's late joining.
And I just started recording. So if anybody doesn't want to be recorded, you can just, take your video off, or this will be, of course, recorded so you can view it after. But awesome. I'm so glad you're all here. I think this is going to be a great panel.
All right, I think we're ready to go.
Awesome.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Wiley. I'm a junior econ major, and thank you for joining us today. I'll let Lauren introduce herself.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marianne. So also, I just want to thank Marianne so much. You've been tremendous while we've been planning this panel. You've been wonderful with, answering questions and just really keeping us all in the loop with everything. So I really appreciate it. So my name is Lauren O'Neill. I am an assistant director in the Center for Career Development at Holy Cross. I actually work with students interested in business consulting finance. So I was very excited that this panel has come to fruition, and at what a fitting time. I don't think there could be a more perfect time for us as women to start really talk about our communication style and albeit assertive, right? So great, so let's get into it. So we've got three wonderful panelists. We've got Juliette from Newmark Knight Frank. Newmark Frank. I'm so sorry, Juliette. I mix that up all the time.
Got it, Lauren. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, good.
My name says Newmark. I would like to change it to Juliette, but
no worries, no worries. Okay. We've got Beatriz, who works at Natixis, and Ashley, who's at Fortune Media Group. So without further ado, I am going to share my screen with everybody. 1 second. And we can start talking. I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves. So let me do that. Okay, great. Okay, can everybody see this okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome, great. So our first panelist up is Juliette. Once again, she's at Newmark Knight Frank, Executive Managing Director. So Juliette, few minutes, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself a little bit more. Tell us a little bit about your role at Newmark Knight Frank, and very briefly, how assertive communication has really been beneficial in your role.
All right, I will do that. So thanks, Lauren and Marianne, and very nice to see Ashley and Beatrice, and thanks for having me, especially during this very special time. Just the whole timing of the event is so wonderful, and I'm excited to be participating with a remarkable group of women, with Kamala Harris getting elected. It's all coming together. As I mentioned, I might need some periodic breaths because I'm emotional and excited, but happy to share some of my experiences. But very briefly, I was class of 1995 from Holy Cross, a German major, and spent a year teaching in Germany after going to Holy Cross, and then wanted to get into business and took a sales and marketing position at the Harpoon Brewery, which was a very logical step coming back from living in Bavaria, and had 4 great years there, and then wanted to transition to something else. And people had always said that sales and marketing was to business much the way commercial leasing is to real estate. And I always had real estate sort of on my mind, and never knew what it was, whether it was, actually listening to Stephanie this morning, I think she probably had my dream real estate and travel job. But I never didn't know if it was commercial, if it was residential, if it was hotels, or what it might have been. And 20 years later, commercial leasing has stuck. And so I spend most of my time working with businesses making real estate decisions. I have the good fortune of working in and around the Cambridge area. So much of the work that I'm doing is on behalf of biotech and pharmaceutical companies, helping them with real estate decisions regarding office and laboratory space. And as it relates to being assertive, I guess my comments are, I once saw a TED Talk, and somebody said, look, there are a couple of sort of quick rules and I like to follow them. And one of them was just say it once, stop, and be direct. And I find myself doing that a lot, simply making a statement, sort of stopping, whether it's in the workplace and, hey, I think we should look at it this way, and then carrying on, or even to my children and saying, get in the car, put on your shoes, whatever it is. So I guess that's sort of my assertive style, if you will. And yeah, be eager to hear from Beatrice and Ashley and hear their perspectives as well.
Thank you so much, Juliette, and thank you so much for being here. Next, we have Ashley. So she works at Fortune Media. She is the Associate Director for Community Engagement. So Ashley, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, and how assertive communication has really been beneficial in the work you do.
Yeah, so good afternoon, good morning, good evening, if anyone's on later. My name is Ashley Alebiosu, class of 2012 from Holy Cross. I was a psychology major, a peace and conflict studies concentrator. I actually studied abroad in Peru, one of the different programs there, and I probably did everything on campus that you could think of, and you can ask some of my friends who are on as well. Mo and Vanessa, I know I see you guys on as well. At Fortune Media, I am the Associate Director of Community Engagement for our business communities. I know it's often confused with social impact, but no, my goal is to connect people, create community, create a sense of belonging, and create experiences that bring our clients back to our brand and retain them with our brand. When I graduated from Holy Cross, I worked at Thomson Reuters for the majority of my early career in sponsorship and branding, and did a lot of different things with a lot of different types of people, ranging from brand exposure to client hospitality, to creating collateral and different marketing campaigns. So I've had a lot of experience in the marketing space, but again, really, really around events and how to keep clients engaged with our brand. When I think of assertive communication, my definition is being consistently clear or explicit with my intention, opinion, decision, without negating someone else in that process. I personally call my style diplomatic assertion because my tone will always be positive. I'm never going, I'm really clear in how I want to communicate to people and ensuring that the impression I'm leaving with them is a positive impression. Today, I'm always going to speak through the lens of being a Black woman, especially a young Black woman in my career. And for me, it was always being the youngest in the room, probably until recently. Now that I'm a little bit older, but typically the youngest in the room and typically the only Black person in the room. So I am beyond thrilled with the news of the election and having a Black woman in the office, and happy to be here and happy to talk.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ashley. And last but not least, we have Beatriz, who works at Natixis Investment Managers. She is an executive vice president and chief financial officer. So Beatriz, please tell us a little bit more about your role and how assertive communication has been really important in the work you do.
Yeah, well, hello, everyone. So glad to be here and participate in this panel. And so I graduated from Holy Cross in 1987, and I was an economics accounting major. So my career path, I went to spent 4.5 years in public accounting, where I did there learn a ton too about the, how to assert yourself and presentations and communication skills. And I have been at Natixis Investment Managers for over 25 years now, and started more junior position as the accounting manager, and became the CFO, I think now, can't remember exactly, but about over 10 years ago. And when it comes to what I do, my role right now, I oversee all aspects of the financial aspects of the business. I also I'm in charge of strategic planning. I also have the project management office and business continuity over me. And when you ask about assertiveness, I look at my style, or what I try to do is, how do you be most effective? What I've learned is over the years that to be effective in communication, it's to be direct, and also make sure you're listening very well. So I have also looked to people around me, and I look to people that I really admire, how they present and their assertiveness skills, and I make that fit into who I am and develop my own style that way. But primarily it's being direct and asking, not being afraid to ask questions.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all so much. So that is our introductory, part of this panel. So now we're going to get to it with regard to some of the questions. So in addition to the questions that have already been designed for this panel, we have some questions that have also come in through the Whova app that people have asked in regard to this panel. So we'll get to those with about 15 minutes to spare at the end of the panel. So great. So let me just pull up my questions. I apologize. I had all of these ready to go and printed, and it did not print, of course. So just to really quickly give a definition of what it is to be assertive, and I thank Pam Ahern, who is actually on this session today. So being assertive means being able to stand up for your own and others' rights in a calm and positive way without being either aggressive or passively accepting wrong. Assertive individuals are able to get their point across without upsetting others or becoming upset themselves. Assertive behavior has respect to the very core of all communication. Aggressive behavior has ego at the very core. How fitting is that today? Assertive behavior is focused with a high listening acuity. So with that being said, I'm going to pass this to one panelist, and then each of the questions from there on out. Don't feel like each person needs to answer if you feel like you've already kind of gotten to that point. And it'll, of course, be organic with regard to who is answering those questions. But for this first one, I'm just going to pass it off, and then you guys can kind of go from there. So I'm going to ask Juliette. So Juliette, if you wouldn't mind answering this question first. So have you always been an assertive person in general? And how about in the workplace? And kind of going off of that, I know this is a bit of a two-parter. How did you develop that assertiveness, and why do you think sometimes it's difficult to be assertive?
I think I've generally always been assertive. Part of it is just wanting to be very efficient, and part of it is sometimes because my thoughts aren't so sophisticated or so intellectual that I can do anything other than be assertive and say what I would like to communicate very succinctly. So I think to me, it's something that's come relatively naturally. My colleagues have often said, oh, it was a really good closing question or closing statement that you asked to, to this client or this potential client. I'll have to write that one down. So I've gotten some good feedback too from my colleagues who have helped me sort of become a better communicator and a more assertive communicator over time. So it's like anything, sort of a work in progress, and constantly learning and constantly sort of trying out different techniques, but always with the goal of being very direct and very succinct.
Awesome. Thank you. Beatriz or Ashley, do you have anything to add to that? And please let me know if you'd like me to read the question again.
Yeah,
I can chime in. Oh, go ahead, Beatriz.
Go ahead.
I mean, I think as a person, and I have more friends who've joined, Danielle and Brittany, thanks for joining. can attest that I've always been assertive. In my personal life, you know, I grew up with two brothers, and I am a first generation Nigerian American. So I think culturally we were taught to be confident and to be strong and to vocalize our thoughts. So I've always brought my full self to wherever situation I'm in. In a professional setting, as I stated, you know, I was often the youngest in the room, but the work that I was doing required me to step up. If I was going to be in the room, and to quote Hamilton, right, to be in the room where it happens, I couldn't sit there passively and let work happen around me. So I always made it a point to, whether it was just asking a question in a conversation with C-suite executives to let them know my voice was there, that was part of it. And then as the space grew for me to insert more opinion and more thought and more strategy, I took advantage of that time. And a lot of the work I've done a lot of work with heads of state, presidents of countries, FBI, Secret Service, the list goes on. And so in that capacity, there wasn't the ability to not be assertive. And a lot of those spaces were with predominantly men. And so again, wanting to make sure I was filling the space, I made sure to be my full self where it was applicable.
Thank you.
So one of the things I wanted to add is also that I think there's like different, you know, as you progress through life, you know, I look at myself and I think it's like different levels of assertiveness. And, you know, especially when you're starting out in your career that you are the most junior person in the group, well, you have your own thoughts, but it becomes difficult if you have a difference of opinion than if you're the most junior person to how do you know, express that difference of opinion. So I think it kind of takes, at least for me, it took like different levels until I had more experience and also more confidence. And then you learned kind of from mistakes of times that you didn't assert yourself, that you had a different opinion, that you didn't speak up, and then you wish you had. And then you've learned from that. It's like, okay, next time I'm gonna handle it this way.
I'd add to that too, that I don't think it's ever too late to go back to that situation and say, hey, in that meeting yesterday, when you said XYZ, or when this topic came up, you know, perhaps we should have looked at it this way, or it made me feel like this. So I've found myself over my career, a day or two later, after hearing something or being part of something and really thinking it through, and thought, gosh, I should have spoken up or should have done something, and find myself making a phone call or sending an email to really provide my sort of final thoughts on that topic that I didn't speak up at the time, or I was too stunned to even speak up given whatever conversation was happening. So I think it's never too late to go back and speak up on a situation that's occurred.
Thank you all so much. So kind of going off of that, I think a little bit more specific here. So can you talk about maybe some of the challenges that women specifically face in the workplace when it comes to you know, being assertive in nature, whether it's, you know, for example, providing feedback or coming back to a, you know, a topic to maybe provide your, you know, final thoughts. So again, what do you think are some issues that women specifically face in the workplace with regard to assertive communication and just, you know, behavior? And so that can go
I think our tone is always perceived in a certain way, right? If in the way we communicate, we can be seen as aggressive, even if we're not intending to be. And so I think, especially I think in a lot of the environments we've worked in, trying to establish ourselves with our counterparts and ensure that we're not going to be railroaded, right, for lack of a better term. But at its core, I always think about assuming positive intent regardless of what's going on. So assuming positive intent, whether it's coming from someone else or even the way I'm communicating with someone, I want to ensure that, look, we're trying to achieve the same goal, right? We're all trying to achieve the same business goal here. And even if we have a difference in opinion, or we might have said something, but we're going to have to shift to something else, just trying to keep that clear that we want the same end goal and trying to manage the expectations that are set. So I think, you know, there's always the perception of women in the workplace of not trying to like dig your heel into someone else. I think the perception as being a Black woman is not trying to be the angry Black woman in the room. So again, trying to assume positive intent, but also remind everyone we're working towards the same goal. And so in my assertion, I'm just trying to keep us all on board in that track.
Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the challenge. And Lauren said it and Ashley just said it, is what's the line between being assertive and being aggressive and being angry. And it's very, very difficult. So sometimes I think too that just saying less, like how can you think that that's aggressive or that that's quote whining? It was simply two sentences that I said. I mean, how can that really be interpreted that way? And I find it's very, very difficult for women where men can say things, and the things that I often hear would sound even more aggressive if they came from a woman. And that's something that just needs to be, that hasn't, it's still a challenge, I'd say. And I don't have any solutions for it, I guess.
Yeah. And I think things have gotten better. Things have definitely gotten better, at least from like that time I started working to now, that I think there's perhaps less of a thought that, that a man versus the woman, how they come across. But I think, Juliette, what you said about the sometimes if you're succinct in how you express your assertiveness, I think there will be less opportunity for it to be misinterpreted. So I think, and this comes with practice definitely, but it's, if you're in a situation that you know what you're going to be meeting on a topic and it's going to be conflict, come really well prepared, because the better prepared you are, then the better organized you will be in your arguments, that then it will come across as not, you want it to have passion, but not too emotional, and more really like, this is your opinion based on facts or based on experience, but it will just come across a little cleaner.
Awesome. Thank you. Brittany Polanco just actually said in the chat, and I'd like to share this with everybody who hasn't seen it. I think this is really powerful. So I found as a woman that gender bias and internalized limited beliefs can be barriers to assertive communication, especially in rooms where you may be the only woman. Calling this to our own and others' awareness is powerful. So thank you, Brittany. It's awesome. Wonderful. So thank you so much. So kind of going off, so of course, different perspectives, kind of like maybe being the only woman in the room, maybe being the only person of color in the room. Obviously, there's detriment to that. And it's kind of difficult to, am I coming off as angry or am I coming off as assertive? So I'd like to take it one step farther. So what are the negative connotations with women being assertive versus men? Can you talk a little bit about that if you've had like a specific experience or just kind of something you've experienced within your industry? So assertive communication for a woman versus a man. So I'd love to hear what you all have to say about that.
No, I have, I think, maybe a man can get away with a little more than a woman. And I remember this experience that it didn't happen to me, but it happened to a friend of mine. She had been promoted and she was negotiating her pay during her promotion. And the HR director was like, why are you being this way? Because she was pushing back to get more money. And, she shared with me her frustration. And it was more about like, if that had been a man who had expressed the assertiveness of, asking for more money, would they have been treated, how she was, how she had been treated? And I think there's, and that's an area that, we all, have read that men are more likely to ask for the pay raise or to for versus the woman. And instead of she felt like she was even asked like, why are you being like this? As if because you're a woman, you shouldn't be asking or, asking for some. So I think it's just being very aware of these biases that may exist and making sure we are, kind of go above that.
Yeah, and that could even go into, not in just kind of negotiation, but just ideas. Like there are situations where you could have the same idea and then your male counterpart says it and that's absorbed and actually spoken to. And you're like, I literally said that 10 minutes ago. So it's kind of trying not to get stuck in that motion and just like, you can, there's ways I think to position yourself to be like, great idea, Tom. I'm glad you were inspired from what I said and move forward. But, just understanding that sometimes your environment isn't going to respect your your position or original statements. And so not being deterred, not running away from that, not getting stuck in that kind of negative talk, but pushing forward and just double down on the fact that you are in that room for a reason, and creating your space and sticking in your space. But you have to know that when you enter that world, men are going to bulldoze, right? They're going to bulldoze. They're going to try and take your ideas, diminish your ideas. And so not to be deterred by that. And it takes time, right? As we've said, like, there's a lot of phases to this in your career, but just, really, really trying to stay strong. And I think some of the core values that we were reminded of this morning during the keynote about what Holy Cross has taught you to be, I think I was actually reflecting on it. I was like, wow, when I hear this, that's why I think I'm the way I am at work. And some of the things that Holy Cross taught me to be, and to be men and women for and with others. And, I still go back to assuming positive intent, but, it takes you time to really remember that and remind yourself of that as you're in the workplace.
Yeah, when you mentioned staying strong, Ashley, it made me think I always try to stay strong, but I also try not to repeat myself. So sometimes I go in there and I just want to, the temptation is to say, look, I want to do, this is how I think we should do it. And then say it again, and then say it again. And there's so much temptation to repeat and restate. But I find myself that if I only make the statement once, it's much more effective, much more assertive than if I open with it, restate it, and then try to close with it. Because I think people are like, okay, we know what you want. And I think that's when sort of the tendency is to interpret the communication as whining, overly aggressive. But if you can stick to saying it once, which is really, really hard for me, because I sometimes go into situations with a very specific idea of how I want to handle it, and to bite my tongue after I've said it rather than trying to conclude and say, all right, we'll do it my way. So.
Yeah, there's, and it's funny, I think there is power in silence sometimes, right? And there's power in, like, I'm gonna let you say and think about what you just said, or so you can think about what I said earlier.
You know what I said? I said it once. It was clear. You know what I think. I don't need to say it again.
Exactly.
Ashley, I really like that. That's definitely something that I need to get comfortable with, is like being comfortable with the silence and just letting, things marinate a little bit, because it's hard. But no, I thank you guys. That's awesome. So kind of switching gears here ever so slightly. So you are all women in leadership positions. So can you describe your leadership style and the qualities that help you engage others that you're working with, that you're just generally interacting with?
But I see myself more as a team member than I do as a true leader. I'll be honest. I work very, very closely with 4 individuals, and 2 of whom I've been with for over 15 years. And I think it's really hard to pinpoint a leader on a productive commercial real estate team, because I think everybody has to sort of play to their strengths, sort of recognize where they're not very good, and really, continue to learn, but also take advantage of the strengths. So I think in my own particular professional situation, everybody having their own distinct role has been the most productive way for our team to operate, as opposed to somebody sort of being top heavy and sort of assigning tasks, roles, etc. So I think, I like to look at leadership as sort of role on the team versus leadership.
I believe that's so hard. It's only so recently that I've had a director title, and so, but I've always been viewed as a leader on the team, and that in my way to communicate with others, but also in the time that I spend with other people on the team. As I've said, I build communities. Part of that is building connections with people, and that takes time to really check in with someone who might not be on my team, but I know I'm going to work with at some point. So I've really taken a lot of initiative in building social capital in any space that I'm in that to respect how someone's role plays a part in the long haul, and like how we all are part of, we're all a wheel on the cog or whatever to the end game. So I think as part of that, I've built bridges with other teams, with other organizations. And so I've ended up becoming a leader in that regard without having the title as a leader. So one, in the way I interact with people, but then also in the fact that I'm rarely silent. Like if we have a town hall, I'm probably going to say something. If we have a team meeting, I'm probably going to say something in the space that it makes sense. And so speaking to Juliette's point, not necessarily by the structure of top heavy, but just in my natural way that I present myself at work in different spaces.
I think for me, like relationship building is a huge part of my job and a huge part of, I think, of also being a good leader. And I also look at it to surround yourself by people who complement you and also have different opinions and views, because that's really how you get to, I think, that's how you challenge each other and you get to a better thought out decisions. And I always say, build your teams around people like, okay, this may be my strength. I don't really have a background in this. That's why I want to bring into my team and people. But the common factor is I think people are very hardworking, smart, and who, want to work hard and improve things and find that commonality, but then find things that, complement you and recognize those differences. And I think that's my personal leadership style, and focusing on the relationships and making sure that those relationships, you're not just building them when you need them, you're basically building them throughout, because you never know when there could be either something you're trying to resolve with that person or a conflict that clearly, if you have a good relationship where you have mutual respect, you're going to get to a better resolution.
Thank you, everybody, so much. So I'd love to hear what you all have to say about maybe a time in your career where you wish you would have asserted yourself. It was a situation that you were involved in, and the assertive communication just didn't quite come through. Maybe what held you back there a little bit. I'm curious I need to work on my assertive communication too, so I'm curious to hear what you all have to say. And kind of maybe taking it one step farther, what were some of the repercussions from not asserting yourself in that situation?
I have one that comes to mind, so I'll start off. So I was earlier in my career, I was a manager at this point, but I did not have a ton of experience with hiring people. So we had a position that was open, and it was reporting to me, and we were interviewing a few people. And so who was interviewing was, myself and also my boss, and then we'd be making a decision. So we had done I don't know how many rounds, and we had our finalists that we were going to be making now, an offer. And, I had, my favorite person that I felt very comfortable with. And my boss, my favorite person was not his favorite. It was actually my least favorite. But he basically was like, I want to convince you why he thought his person, was better. And it was interesting. At the end of the day, I did not feel that way, because I didn't feel the person really wanted the job that he had, he preferred. But I did not push back enough. We had a difference of opinion, and I didn't push back what my gut was saying. And we ended up making an offer to that person. They accepted, but then right before they started, they basically said no because they took another offer. And it just, maybe that was luck, but my point was like, I don't think, when I had pushed back a little bit, I had said, my gut tells me she doesn't really want this job. And we wasted a lot of time. Then we were back to square one, because then the other candidate we lost. So, but I learned from that. The reason I didn't push back, because I thought I didn't have enough experience. And I did not have enough experience to trust my gut. Like, my gut was telling me, this is, she didn't want this. She really wasn't that interested in this job. But I didn't have enough. I didn't have enough experience to trust it. So I didn't push back. I said, okay, we'll go with your candidate, and I learned from that. That was one of my first experiences, that like, trust your gut and speak up and speak up about it. So that's my lesson. And I have many times that now I'm always like, I trust it.
Thank you so much.
So this is an interesting tale, and I know we're recording, so I won't use any names, but In my first role at Thomson Reuters, as I mentioned, we did a lot of high profile events. So one of the events we would do was White House Correspondents' Dinner weekend, and we would have a whole group of like celebrities and athletes that we would invite, and my team would essentially be their host for the weekend and shepherd them to different events and activities in DC. So the first year we did this, the team that I was working on, we were very young, like early 20s, really excited to be in DC. We had a ton of different activations. We had cars everywhere and just a lot of parties, right? This sounds a little salacious, but I'm getting there. And so one of my teams, we had a co-sponsored party at one of the embassies in DC. And a colleague of mine thought it would be smart to take a bottle from this party. And so this context is sometimes being assertive isn't always in the office, but it's in context when you are at work with colleagues and where it takes you. So he thought it would be smart to take a bottle because we were a sponsor of this party, and the collective group was kind of like, not sure if this is a good idea. And so I was like, I'm just going to separate myself from him rather than speaking up and saying this is not a great idea given the visibility and we're at work. And so he took this bottle and he left, and the first person he ran into was our SVP. The first person he ran into was our SVP and her sister, who was like the head of the company we were co-sponsoring with, in front of this embassy in DC. And I'll just say that it was not the best situation. And in fact, we had amended work rules for months to follow. And we were actually all restricted with travel and things to follow. And in my communication with my SVP after that, she said to me, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you say, like, this is not, the optics we want for our brand. This isn't the optics we want for our team. Like, we trusted you guys to be out in the field. And we respected you guys to do that, and you've let us down. And, I think because, like I said, I was usually pretty vocal in the different roles I've had, but I didn't say anything, that hit me hard. That I was kind of like, oh, I disappointed you even out of the office. And how do we kind of recoup our brand and our visibility and things like that? And, nothing really happened, but it was the fact that something could have happened. We had an ambassador in the building. There was our CEO in the building. That it just wasn't great all around. So when you think about your decisions, not always physically in the workplace, but in the surrounding spaces you could be with work and your colleagues, and again, the visibility and the tone you're setting with your brand, always understand there's always a space to speak up. And when I think about why didn't I, because I was like, I'm not physically doing this action. I shouldn't be accountable for this person. But at the end of the day, it would have been, a reflection on our company should anything have happened, and our whole team would have been accountable for that. So, I look back on that moment and I say, like, wow, I should have said something and probably been a little bit more explicit and said, like, this is really not what makes sense. We can go buy a bottle. You want a bottle? We can go buy one. We can go to the bar afterwards. Like, this is not what you do in the space of branding, marketing, and specifically in this weekend and who is around and on company time. So again, we had repercussions to follow after that, and it could have just been, a few words said at that moment to take away from that. And I think about that all the time because of how much, I say, trouble we got into as a result, and how easily we could have not been in trouble. But again, you can get really excited in your first couple of years of work and do some really awesome things, but trying to respect that you're not representing yourself only, but you're representing a company and a large organization and all the implications that are there too.
Thank you, Ashley. Anything?
Yeah, I have one too. I mean, it's a real wound and a scar, but I will share it because maybe there's a lesson for somebody else. And I'll give you sort of the high points. I was on a property tour and I was with a CFO and a CEO of a very high profile company. I was touring a piece of space, and the landlord, which was trying to court this prospective company, was giving an overview of his project. And he mentioned that the building was being renovated and converted, and a couple of stores were going to be taken away. But he said, Juliette, you wouldn't know those stores because you weren't even born yet when they were around. Then he carried on and he made another reference to this store no longer being available, and it's going to be a future office and lab space for this company. But again, Juliette, you wouldn't even remember that store because you weren't around and you couldn't have. And meanwhile, I had shopped at the store like 25 years ago. So clearly I was around. So he's basically making comments, I guess really about my age and maybe questioning my professionalism in front of a client of mine, a CEO and a CFO. And meanwhile, my client sort of looking at me being like, I wonder if he's undermining your credibility, if you shouldn't be, if you're qualified to be representing me, if in fact you don't even know the store because you're not old enough to have shopped at it. So I was in the situation, like steam is coming out of my ears. And do I really shut this guy down and say, look, I know the store. I'm older than I think. Stop making me look inexperienced in front of my client. Do I convert to humor? Do I do nothing? I mean, what do I do here? Because I was, again, so stunned by the situation. So in this situation, I didn't do anything. I kind of tried to laugh it off and let the guy make some comments about my youthful appearance. And that was it, because I didn't want to cause a scene in front of him. So I let it go and was angry about it for the next, day or two. And would 2 days later, I get a phone call from the guy who had made these comments, because I had gotten back to him through another real estate person who was there, that I was dissatisfied, displeased with his comments. And he called up and he said, you know what? I thought I was making a compliment about your youthful appearance, but now I can really see in this hyper-competitive business where my comments might have made it feel like you were inexperienced, and I was doing it in front of your client, and the client might be questioning your capabilities, professionalism, experience. He goes, I never saw it that way, and please accept my apology. Okay, so thank you for seeing it that way. Yes, that's exactly how you made me feel. So I sort of recognized it. And in this instance, I was glad I didn't cause a scene. I was glad to get the apology. Would I have handled it differently? Probably not. I don't think everybody would have recognized and called me. So I sort of give him credit for doing that, because I think there's sort of a whole category of people who have yet to learn that. So I was glad that he came around, and I guess glad that I didn't make a scene, but also was very pleased that somebody sort of told him, hey, you might want to reach out and be careful about your behavior going forward, especially when you're presenting to, to Juliette and her clients. So.
Thank you all so much. So for the sake of time, around 1:45, we'll go into questions that have been submitted through Whova. So I have one more question for you all. So when you are, looking for a leadership role or an opportunity, what do you look for in these types of roles, and how do you assess what type of role is right for you? It's kind of a broad question, but I think a very important one. So.
I think that goes back to team, Lauren, sort of the players on the team, the specific roles, the ability to get things done and be effective.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I look for people. I look to see who am I going to be working with? Are they people who are respectful, smart, respectful, and allow for differences of opinion?
And building off what I think Beatriz said earlier, I look for people who will compliment me. So, I am not a data heavy person. I can tell a story all day long, but I can think about the analytics we need, but I am not one to interpret them. So that for me is, I just hired someone and I was like, I needed someone who had that strength to make our team stronger. And so I think, going back to who can complement and make your whole team stronger as a whole is what I usually look for.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. So those are my questions. I'm sorry, again, my printer, brand new, just stopped working. So I've got my phone up with the app. So with 2 votes, people have submitted these questions. So if you feel that you've kind of already answered this question, you can definitely kind of forego it. But what are some common habits among professional women that make them, that make assertive communication more difficult for them?
I think maybe that, I don't know if this is exactly getting to this, but I think sometimes we tend to talk too much, or not too much, but talk more. I was actually in this training session for women on how to basically apply to be in board positions. And as we were getting trained to basically how do you interview for these positions, one of the advice they gave us is make sure like that you sometimes be more concise. And even when a question is asked, you, instead of going on, say, have I answered? Like basically you answer your question, and maybe you say, have I answered your question? And I think there's, that can just sometimes be, you're trying to be assertive, trying to be confident, but it may appear less organized. So I think that's, I don't know if that really answers that, but that's something I think one of the challenges that, that we have.
Thank you.
This has actually come up for me recently, and I'm still trying to figure out how to process it. I do think this could be generational. Nothing to the generations that are on the call, but I've encountered situations where the female leadership often still respect the male opinion. And so I think as women start to take up more spaces in executive roles, there also is a change in, there needs to be more change in mindset. And so some of the work that I've done in terms, and also who I hired, I explicitly hired a man on my team to give us more power in our conversations. And that was more from understanding that our culture is still a little bit male heavy, and that the male voice is often regarded more. And so I think trying to challenge that, and either if it's building up your team to give you more of a punch in that space, but trying to challenge that mindset and say like, yeah, look, as you know, gender parity is a growing topic, and companies are speaking to that challenge and diversifying their workforce. There's still a mindset shift that has to come with that. You know, if you look at most corporations, like I work at Fortune, we have all the lists in the world where you can look at all the companies and who sits on what levels. A lot of corporations, a lot of companies, a lot of America is still white old men leading organizations, and unfortunately, that mindset is still clear in a lot of organizations. So I think a lot of anything I've gotten pushback from, or a lot of structure issues I face, is from kind of the old guard of thinking. And so trying to challenge even the women that I work with in some spaces, and again, in a respectful manner when it makes sense, but understanding that that's the structure we've been indoctrinated into. And so trying to challenge that is something that I believe in. I know it can be really hard, again, coming from the roles and still trying to grow in my career, but respecting the old, but also understanding that we need to be flexible and grow in the way that we view and see our workspace as well.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Actually, some additional questions have come in. So I feel if any of these questions are not answered, I would love to, for the panelists, if I could send you these questions and maybe hopefully get some of those responses out to the people who attended today. Or Marianne might have some other recommendations for how to, get that information across as well. So I like this question. So how can we tackle the negative stereotypes? So we've talked a lot about, men may come off, they're just confident and women are being bossy, right? I hate that term bossy. But how can we tackle the negative stereotypes associated with being a woman in a leadership position, such as, being more bossy or aggressive?
I let the work speak for itself. I really do. I will assert myself and speak my voice all day long, but at the end of the day, you will see what I will deliver, what my team will deliver, and that'll prove why I am the way that I am. So, it could be per my last email, it could be, that's what we discussed in the conference room, but at the end of the day, what is delivered, I think speaks for itself. And so that also for me reminds me to keep asserting myself and where it makes sense. And I also think there's a spirit of gratitude that goes with that. So in all the work that I do and everything that happens, I appreciate thank you notes. I appreciate, a debrief conversation that says, wow, like you put in so much work and that makes sense. And I actually was telling some of my friends the other day that I keep, I call it a clip folder in my mailbox. And that's where I put all thank you notes or notes of gratitude or just appreciation points that are respective to my work. And the days that I'm like, wow, I don't know how to get out of this fog, or I don't know what I'm up to. And I go in there and I read those notes to remind myself that no, the work you do is of this level. The work you do makes sense. Like you as a person, you add value to this organization. And I just go back and read those comments from my colleagues or whoever to remind myself of that sometimes when you kind of get lost with everything that's going on, or you get lost in what's happening outside of work, right? 2020 has been a crazy year. So I think sometimes I use that to ground myself and remind myself that, you know, my work ethic and my work style makes sense and that I deliver when it, you know, in the way that I do.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, thinking about the results and the clients first. Yeah, and showing your value based on what you deliver. I mean, that speaks more than any words.
Great. So the next question, oh, we've got somebody in the waiting room. The next question, I really like this because I myself, I'm a very emotional person. So how do you feel about emotions in the workplace? I find myself torn between being authentic and hiding emotions to be taken seriously.
You know, I'm a very passionate person, and I have to say, I really, you know, and I can tell you, you know, so many times, especially when I was earlier in my career, that I would cry. I cry easily. You know, I have no shame in saying that I do. And especially earlier in my career, if something, you know, either you were stressed out or something had happened that someone said and it hurt your feelings, you know, and how I always would struggle because I'm like, oh, I wish I could be brushing it off more and not let it get to me. But then you're like, so, you know, I remember this with my boss, like I was frustrated about something and I went to talk to him about it and I started crying. And, you know, I really wish, I mean, you know, when he said to me, it's like, it is who you are. It's part of who you are. And it made me feel a lot better that it's like, okay, you know, and as I got older and experience, I've gotten a lot better about that. But, you know, I think it's recognizing like it's, you know, who you are. And there's some things that you can't change, but it's like, okay, let me keep it. How do I do that more in private? That I may be closing my door and just saying, okay, or maybe you go for a walk and if you're angry about something, like, you know, getting those emotions out and then and getting it organized, and then you go back with an organized thought. But I definitely have to say, like, I've always like struggled with the fact that I've like maybe I, you know, get too emotional about things, and how do you not have it come across as a stereotypical, or how do you come across as professional, but at the end of the day that you care. And I think it's, you know, passion, emotions, at the end of the day, you wouldn't feel a certain way if it's not that you care so deeply about what you were doing.
Yeah, I think that is so great, Beatrice. Not only crying, but just like you could be nervous, you could be anxious, you could be all those things. But I think just going back to the fact that you care is part of that. And sometimes if it's not work related, you could go to work and just be upset about something else. And, you know, someone's like, how are you? It could just like trigger waterworks. So I think it's human, right? I think it's human. If you could be emotional, you may not be. I also think trying to, I think in this space, if you're going into work and maybe something's weighing on you, giving yourself time away, like if it's going for a walk, if it's going to the bathroom and you know, having a moment, if it's having a colleague have a moment with you, but allowing yourself to express yourself. But then also I'm of the mind that's like, all right, I'll have a cry, but then I know I have to lock it up and get into a meeting. So I think there's ways to find that balance. And I don't know if there's a right answer to that ever, because you don't know when you're gonna have that moment sometimes.
Yeah.
Sorry, Juliette.
I coach myself out of it to the extent that I can.
Yeah.
And just try to, I don't know, maybe just taught, or my nature is to try to keep things in the box. But I also know that the situation looks very different after you take a walk, after you've had an apple, the next morning, and a week later. I mean, I can think of many moments where I've been on the verge of tears, ready to pull my hair out. And then a week later, I'll sort of replay the situation. I'm like, that's what I was mad at her because of what? Like that a situation in the moment is so different than the situation when you look back. And sometimes I sort of say, all right, just I know you're livid right now, but don't react right now because the situation is going to look very different again, in the morning or a week from now. So do you want to handle it now, or do you want to handle it after you've had some time to really process it, think through it? And sometimes I say, is this even worth my anger or my frustration? I'm like, this is such a tedious, menial thing. I'm not even going to give in. I'm not even going to let you see that this is bothering me, because it's not worth my tears. So sometimes I just have these coaching mechanisms to try to get myself out of the situation.
Yeah, Juliette, I think it's like you have to ask, wait, is this worth it? Like, what am I getting so upset about? And, especially with emails, sometimes it's like people, and you see it, the people that respond to these things, and you're like, oh no. And I think it's pausing, and, because people are going to respect you more if you're taking more of a, I'm going to say, kind of logical, pragmatic, and not such a, reactive approach to maybe even some emails. So my advice always in the emails is pause, just the same way, like you're like angry and may need to take a walk and may need, to calm down. It's the same thing with the emails or text or whatever the heck we're using these days.
Yeah, don't
Yeah.
reply. We've all learned that lesson, to replying too early. And
yes.
Is this worth losing sleep over? Like, is this matter, this person, the situation, whatever it is, really worth sacrificing 45 minutes, an hour of my precious sleep time? And this person said, no, it's not
Oh my
worth,
God.
literally not worth losing
Juliette,
sleep.
I channel you. I channel that energy so hard. Is it even worth? Oh my gosh. I was literally like snapping here, like Juliette is preaching. Okay. But Beatrice brought up a great point, because you'll learn email tone is very different for different people. And sometimes people are just direct an email and it can come off so harsh. And you have to realize, like, you're just trying to get, be efficient. And so not to always take things personally and overreact, I think is huge. But email tone, as you enter the workforce, is so different from a lot of forms of communication. And just, keeping that in mind as well.
I think that's awesome advice, because like a brief, concise email can like almost make me cry at like the drop of a hat. So thank you. That's good to hear. I'm a crier, Beatriz. I'm a crier. So all right. And I think we've got time for one more question. So I'll be sure to send you the remainder of, what we've got left. But what do you think are some, I apologize for the person who posted this. I missed this one. I'm so sorry. But what are some common habits among professional women that can make assertive communication more difficult for them? Do you have any advice on that? That's an interesting.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. So what do you think are some common habits among professional women that make assertive communication more difficult for them? And that'll wrap up our session. That'll be
We talked about this one. I think this is what Beatrice answered before. I think ending with a question, lots of ums, lots of I knows, and lots of repetition. I think a lot of the natural speech patterns of women sometimes make the individual sound less assertive. So I think a lot of it is speech patterns and delivery.
I think apologizing all the time too.
That too.
I just apologize. I could have said, oh, I missed this one. Instead, I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Yep, I'm catching it myself.
Somebody told me recently to stop saying, sorry about the delay. And instead I should write, thank you for your patience. So sort of get rid of the sorry, like when responding to an email, sorry about the delay in getting to this. It's thank you for your patience. Here is the requested or the promised information. But yeah, apologizing is a good one.
I think we should, it's like, and I still do it. I look around and I say, who does things really well? And, oh, I like that. I liked how they did that. I like their style of this. How does that fit in with my style? And kind of really learn, like, watch what you find, that people do that you think is really effective, and see if you can incorporate it into your toolkit. And in the same way, find things that some people do, both men and women, that you do not like that approach, and make sure, like, do I do that? Ask yourself, do I do that? And if you do, it's all about practice and prep. And then the more you do that, the better you become.
Yeah, I like that. I like thinking, reflecting on your work style and also being open to feedback. I've often told my managers, like, I prefer to know if there's something I need to fix sooner rather than later. Like, don't save it for my performance review in 6 months. Tell me at our next one-on-one. So I think just being open to, if it's constructive criticism or just positive feedback, whatever, open to feedback and being flexible to grow, I think helps, because I think you can get stuck and just say, well, that it worked that one time. This is the way I operate, and just, sticking with bad habits. But going back to the communication style as well, qualifiers, omitting qualifiers from your communication style, right? That's saying I'm sorry or apologies, etc. And just being clear and just saying, great, thanks, moving forward, this is what it is. Yeah.
So I believe that's all we have for time. We have 1 minute left. So Ashley, Juliette, Beatriz, thank you so much. This has been so incredibly valuable. This has been recorded, so I hope that students who maybe weren't able to attend today, or alumni, will also be able to view this, because the advice that was offered today and just your own experiences, thank you for sharing. This is awesome. I took a lot away from this, so I'm eternally grateful. So thank you. So Marianne, is there anything you wanted to add about from Women in Business, or?
Just for students to check their emails for potential seats on the committee for this coming year. But thank you so much, ladies. I mean, for me, I know this was really helpful, especially as a junior looking for, what am I gonna do for internship.